All right, everyone, welcome back. We're here to go finish the list of 10 things that are the board roles and responsibilities. So we'll pick up from the last lesson with number 6. And this is ensuring the organization has adequate financial resources for operations and capital requirement. By the way, just a tip, if you're doing only an operational budget and you have some capital needs, even if those capital needs are for office supplies and maybe a vehicle, new technology, those kinds of things, and by office supplies I mean obviously furniture and equipment and that sort of thing. If you have a need for some capital, if you have a building, if you have responsibilities in the building you're in for repair and maintenance and renovations and upkeep of the heating and ventilation systems, those kinds of things, you should have a capital budget. That capital budget should be developed in line with anticipating what some of your needs will be. And the question that we often have to ask as board members is, how do we fund our capital budget? And of course the answers are many. We can do that out of business enterprises. We can do that by writing grants and asking our funders for funding that relates to the bricks and mortar components of our business. We can fundraise directly from our community for building buildings or renovating buildings and that kind of thing. And sometimes we have operational funders who are prepared to give us money against capital projects. But it's very important to know what our capital needs are. And the reason for that is we can't rob Peter to pay Paul. Our funders and our donors expect us to use the money that we receive to go to serving the community or the people that are our constituents or participants. And they don't really appreciate if we try to squirrel away a little bit of money and put it over to the side for the rainy day when we talked earlier about the roof falling in or some other lesser disaster. So we really do need to anticipate, when will we need a new roof? When will we need a new furnace? Even in buildings where you perhaps don't own the building and you're a tenant, very often we spend money on those buildings. We always need new technology. So those kinds of things are included in the capital budget. Very important to know that that exists so that we can create plans and strategies to actually have the resources, the money in the bank to be able to pay for the things, so that we're not always sitting on chairs that are broken. It's a nonprofit thing that we tend to cobble together chairs and cobble together tables, and it's not a good thing. We should be doing a better job of planning and resourcing our capital needs. We need to also ensure, and this is a big passion, if you will, bugbear of mine to some degree, that we have sufficient diversity of our revenue streams. And I'm talking fundraising, but not just fundraising. Social enterprise is a huge, huge component of the things that we should be doing. More and more innovative and creative alternatives are being presented to us every day. I have among my client groups some wonderful examples of small organizations that run businesses, one or more businesses, and they're generating anywhere from tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands of dollars of unencumbered revenue. I'm going to suggest 2 resources for you. Google Jean Block. She is a US-based consultant who does tons of stuff around board governance and also fundraising, and she has a wonderful book called Show Me the Money. I love it. I love her approach. She teaches workshops all over the US, so she's a really good person to learn from. And the other is a book by Richard Steckel. Richard Steckel passed away a few years ago, but the book is called Filthy Rich. It may be old, but it's an absolute classic, and I would recommend reading it. I love his model of social enterprise. It asks for creating social enterprise champions, and it's a really, really simple but direct, not without hard work, way of generating a business plan and creating the process that we need to create social enterprise. So enough said on that. I would love to do a full-on course on social enterprise. It's really past due. We could be doing some really, really cool stuff. And the last part of this is that we need to create cash reserves that will carry the agencies or organizations operations for at least 6 months and ideally more. So if you're a $2 million a year organization, take what you would normally spend in 6 months, and so say, let's just say $1 million, and say we need cash reserves equal to $1 million, so that in the event that we have a disaster, in the event that we have complete and total and utter loss of funding, in the event that something happens in our organization that's catastrophic, we can actually carry our our payroll, carry our services, do the things that we do, and making sure that that is happening for at least 6 months. Now, this will take you a while to accomplish, but I'm going to tell you that it's an important strategic goal. So if you don't have that set aside, or if you've got 2 months or 3 months worth, then keep working at creating the revenue and segregate that, set it aside either in an accounting fashion, segregate it, or in an absolutely separate bank account, and those are your reserves that will carry you for a while. By the way, we're supposed to, as ordinary human beings, have at least 6 months and ideally a year of cash reserves to be able to carry our own financial obligations. So it's no different for your nonprofit organization. We need to then, this is point number 7, look at the whole area protecting ourselves against risk. And we need to not just sit and say, oh, we just hope. Hope is not a management strategy. We hope that no bad things happen. We hope that nobody sues us. We hope whatever that is. So let's stop being hopeful and let's start getting proactive. Let's start putting plans in place. So create a risk management plan, assess the types of risks by category. There's risks that relate to managing human resources. There's risks that relate to facilities. There's risks that relate to the services that you provide. There's risks that relate to your board of directors and your paid staff who have access to funds and etc. So there's a bunch of risks that we can do a segmented look at, and again there's a module on risk management in this course, and we need to look at how do we protect ourselves as an organization. And I'm not just talking about buying insurance. Insurance protects us financially against loss, but it does not protect us in a practical way. So we need to do things that will, just to use a simple example, is that it's good to have slip-fall insurance as part of your liability package, but that does not replace shoveling the sidewalk if it snows, right? Or making sure that your sidewalk is properly leveled so that people do not come along and trip on it. So by being proactive, I don't mean, well, we have insurance so we've got it covered. I want you to go and assess those things and make sure that you are doing that. Now, when I say you, I'm talking organization. The board needs to direct the executive director and the paid managers to ensure this is taken care of, and under the trust but verify banner, we want to make sure we ask questions to say, let's do a drill down on our insurance policy. Let's do an evaluation of when is the last time that we looked at our facilities or our programs or our staff or our HR policies, and determine where the risks are and determine what we are doing to mitigate those risks in advance of anything bad happening. So that's a really important part of the board's role, is oversight of the whole risk management component of organizational life. Number 8 is developing a competent board that represents the diversity of the community that it is serving. It has members with the skills required for organizational stewardship, understands its role in the organization, develops and monitors clear and written governance policies, has plans for its own succession, engages in regular self-evaluation and training. Now, this is a long thing, and by the way, I'm not blind to the fact, I'm an English minor. I know this is a run-on sentence for those of you that say, oh, this is a big long sentence, okay? Absolutely true, but in a nutshell, that's what boards are all about, right? So diversity and community is really important. I served on the YWCA board of a fairly large YW in a fairly large Canadian city. And when I looked around the board table, it was a huge board, much too large a board, 20-some board members. I looked around the board. I was one of 2, by the way, it was all women, not diverse in terms of gender. Men could be users of our service, but men could not be members, voting members of the organization. So this was the old girls' school. I looked around the table. I was one of 2 women on the board who was under, I'm going to say under 30. And I was one of 2 women who worked full-time. The rest were women, lovely ladies, but they were, chair of the board was the wife of a sitting member of the Legislative Assembly. We had many retired women of men with fairly substantial presence and roles and money in the community. We had women who were retired university professors. So this was a very elite group of people. Now, those of you that know a YWCA well know that the services tend to be very grassroots, very fundamentally oriented towards the service of people who are disadvantaged and who are in need. And in fact, this is the international history of most YWs around the world. So who were we serving and who was on our board? There was a really big gap. Now, I'm not saying that the women that were on that board were not compassionate people. They absolutely were. But the degree to which they could understand and appreciate the challenges and barriers and hardship and struggles and heartache of the women that we were serving and of the families we were serving and even of the men that we served is absolutely in question. And the mass majority, this was located, our primary building was located in the inner city downtown area of a large center. And we were serving people who were homeless. We were serving people who had addictions. We were serving people who had significant mental health challenges. And that is not the world that these women lived in or that resonated for them. So it's very, very important that you hold the organization, a mirror up to the organization's board and say, are we diverse enough? A lot of the women that we served were, and families that we served were First Nations, Indigenous people, and we had no Indigenous people on the board. So it's very important that the board hold that mirror up and say, are we reflecting in the diversity on our board something that comes close? And again, it might take you several years to accomplish this, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't start on the journey. Get on the path and start putting one foot in front of each other and make it happen. In a few years' time, you'll be amazed at the nature of the conversations that are happening around the table and the nature of the dialogue that happens at strategic planning meetings and at committee meetings, etc., will fundamentally shift, and it will be for the better. By the way, there will be more disagreements. There will be less groupthink, so prepare yourself for that reality. So we as a board need to begin that looking at those responsibilities, and we make sure that we are well educated. I'm going to talk in another module and another lesson around the whole area of self-evaluation and how we go about doing that. Let's go to number 9. Advocate and support for the work of the organization within the community. So this is the outward role of the board. We've been mainly talking about the inward looking role of the board. And so the board's job is to also be aware of things that are happening in the organization and be advocating and supporting the organization, showing up at fundraising dinners, going to meetings with funders and advocating for new funding for this or increases in funding for that, or the loss of funding, advocating against that if we have funders that are beginning to withdraw. Making sure that you're connecting board members with major donors and with key donors in your community. And responding proactively to the needs of the community. If you have 10 board members, which is probably a pretty average board size, somewhere around 7 to 10, those people should be the eyes and ears of the needs in their community as they talk to their neighbors, as they go to their kids' schools, as they connect with people in their working environment. Very important for those board members to say, I wonder if this is a need our organization should be serving in some way. Let me give you a simple example of that. I sat on an SPCA board many years ago, and we had a board member who came in and said, what about all the people that can't afford to pay for the veterinary care for the companion animals? Should we be doing something about that? Well, this was a Humane Society SPCA that didn't have a lot of money to support the services they were providing to the animals that came into the shelter and the people that were surrendering them, and then the adopting folks that came in the door. So it was not particularly well received in the initial conversation, but as we came back to it over a period of a couple of years, we started to realize this was a real need, and it was also something that people who were donors to the organization, who loved animals, were acutely aware of and very sympathetic to. So there was a board member who rotated off the board who created a fund and made a major donation as a seed donation to this particular fund that was intended to have board members and community members and staff members donate to be able to provide veterinary services to people who were living in poverty, could not afford, and this include people who were working and living in poverty, could not afford the veterinary services that their companion animals required. I thought it was awesome, and that fund sustains to this day. So very important that we start thinking about how do we respond proactively to community need. And I was to this day, I can remember the name of that board member and the conversation that we had the first time in the board meeting, and she was a very passionate advocate for the idea of this particular fund. The final item on our list of roles and responsibilities for boards is to ensure a regular objective evaluation and satisfaction of employees. So this we've talked about before, but it's a critical one of those top 10, and that is part of monitoring management and the results of those evaluations. The board doesn't do the evaluation, the board commissions it. The board requires it in their policy. The board directs the executive director to make it happen, and then receives the results of the evaluation together with any action plan or strategies that are needed to be able to address the any areas of the evaluation that need to be improved on inside the organization. All right, that brings us to the end of the 10 and the end of this lesson. I'd like you to continue on to the next lesson, because the next lesson is actually a learning assignment. So I've collected those all up for this module and put them in one place for you. And so the next lesson are the things that make the rubber meet the road for your board. So jump forward to the next lesson, please.